and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. This week, our subject is Anne of Cleves. Despite Henry's very vocal misgivings, the two were married on the 6th of January, 1540. He was sure a charmer. The phrase, "God send me well to keep," was engraved around Anne's wedding ring. Immediately after arriving in England, Anne conformed to the Catholic form of worship which Henry had retained after his break with Rome. Because after all, he was still a Catholic. He just didn't want to answer to the Pope. The couple's first night as husband and wife was not a successful one. Harry confided to Cromwell that he had not consummated the marriage, saying, "I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse." Rude. The king suffered from a little ED. He said because his wife was too ugly to inspire him. It likely had more to do with him. He also claimed she smelled. Also, probably more of a him problem at this point. In February 1540, 1 month into their marriage, speaking to the Countess of Rutland, Anne praised the king as a kind husband, saying, "When he comes to bed, he kisseth me, and he taketh me by the hand, and he biddeth me good night, sweetheart. And in the morning kisseth me and biddeth me farewell, darling," meaning no sex. It was unclear if she knew that sex was required to have a baby. She was a very sheltered 24. The other option is she could have been being sarcastic when she was asked, like, "Hey, how's it going? How's the baby making going?" She's like, "Well, he kisses me, so it's going well." And maybe they missed her sarcasm. I'm not sure. Lady Rutland responded, "Madam, there must be more than this, or it will be long ere we have a Duke of York, which all this realm most desireth," meaning, "Girl, if you want to give the king a spare, this isn't going to cut it. He only has one son, and England could use a second." But I'm not sure what they were expecting her to do. His pride was likely already damaged beyond repair. It only got worse when Lady Mary, the king's retroactively illegitimate daughter in heavy air quotes, came to court to meet her new stepmother. Anne didn't know everything that went down because she hadn't been in England, and again, she was sheltered. There was no internet. She wasn't watching him on TMZ with all his marriage drama. She thought meeting the king's now bastard daughter was an insult. It was awkward because it was rude. No one explained that she was Princess Mary until she was 17 and her dad got mad at her mom and preferred his new family. Things were not going well for Anne. Anne was commanded to leave the court on the 26th of June, and on the 6th of July, she was informed of her husband's decision to reconsider the marriage. Anne was terrified. She was still communicating through interpreters, but she didn't know what was about to happen. She broke down, screaming and crying. Of his 3 previous marriages, he had 2 discarded wives, abandoning one to die alone and straight up beheading the other one. She didn't even know what she had done wrong. Witness statements were taken from a number of courtiers and 2 physicians, which register the king's disappointment at her appearance. King Henry also commented that he could not believe she was a virgin. Rude. Henry had regretted his decisions. The reason for this marriage was to get an ally against the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire after he left the Catholic Church. But Cleves wasn't the ally they had hoped, and they were about to go to war with the Holy Roman Empire. Henry had hoped that he would get support from the Schmuckelte clique, but he was still a Catholic that didn't want to listen to the Pope. They wanted nothing to do with him. On paper, he was Protestant, but he wasn't Lutheran, so they didn't count it. Henry claimed this whole alliance situation had not been explained to him properly by Cromwell, whose job it was to set this marriage and alliance up. And Cromwell had done a very good job setting it up. He was probably the greatest lawyer of the time in England, and he had made a deal that wouldn't be easy to break. He was too good at his job. Shortly afterwards, Anne was asked for her consent to an annulment, which she agreed, because what else was she going to do? She was like, dude, you don't want to be married to me? Same. Let's just call this marriage a day. Nothing to see here. Hashtag dodged a bullet. Cromwell was the moving force behind the marriage, and he was attainted for treason, meaning that setting up this blind date from hell got him killed. It also got his wife and children disinherited. Let's keep in mind that Cromwell had supported the king in his first divorce. He had spearheaded the trial that got his second wife beheaded, and was the key player in setting him up with his third wife, the love of his life. But setting up this fourth marriage, that was all it took for him to lose favor. King Henry was increasingly unstable and only getting worse. It was every man and woman for themselves, just trying to survive the later reign of King Henry VIII. The marriage was annulled on the 12th of July, 1540, because they weren't wasting any time, on the grounds of non-consummation and her pre-contract to Francois of Lorraine. Henry VIII's physician stated that after the wedding night, Henry said he was not impotent because he experienced duas pollutiones nocturnas en somno, 2 nocturnal pollutions while in sleep. Twice he had a dirty dream to completion, so it must be Anne's fault. Okay. Anne had been given dower lands to fund her household, including manor houses. Dower lands were what a queen would get if the king died, so she could support her post-king lifestyle. The king was still alive, but he was like, take your inheritance and go. And she was like, nice doing business with you. She was a little bit extra and sent her wedding ring back to the king, suggesting that he smash it into 1,000,000 pieces, as it no longer had any meaning to her. As former queen, she received a generous settlement, including Richmond Palace and Hever Castle, the home of Henry's former in-laws, the Boleyns. Henry and Anne became good friends. She was an honorary member of the king's family and was referred to as the king's beloved sister. She was invited to court often, and, out of gratitude for her not contesting the annulment, Henry decreed that she would be given precedence over all women in England, save his own wife and daughters. So he was like Ross in Friends. He had failed at marriage a lot of times, and he just didn't want to talk about it. Anyway, on to wife number 5. Quick, Cromwell's blind marriage was a bust. The Duke of Norfolk was like, look, I know that last time I told you to marry my niece Anne Boleyn, it didn't end great. Mistakes were made, but I have other nieces. I have this one. She's 17. She's very pretty, and her name is Catherine. She likes parties and has good manners and is just a fun girl. I know last time my niece lost her head, but how badly could it go? If you need a reminder, Catherine would be his 5th wife. Count on your fingers the 6th wives of King Henry. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded. It is going to end very badly. Worse than last time. Catherine will have an episode. She's up next. But back to Anne and her Matrix-style bullet dodging. Anne spent her Christmases at court and seemed to enjoy her time. She was close with the king and his daughters. She is said to have passed her time flirting, sporting, and on recreation. Once she bought 200,000 gallons of beer for her household, probably to sell. But maybe it was a party. I don't know. Probably to sell. She was probably reselling the beer. Anne's old betrothed, the Duke of Lorraine, was getting married to none other than Christina of Denmark. King Henry's whole divorce was based on the fact that he said Anne was already married to the Duke of Lorraine. So by marrying the girl who turned Henry down, that wasn't appreciated. Henry sent letters telling people to pick sides. Either you agreed with the king's divorce and you would skip the wedding, or you didn't and you would go. And people picked sides. So Anne was living her best single lady life. Henry married Catherine Howard. Stuff happened. Catherine was executed. We'll get into that next week. After Catherine Howard was beheaded, Anne and her brother William, Duke of Cleves, pressed the king to remarry Anne. Why? No idea. Seems like more of a her brother thing than a her thing. Why risk that? She had it made. Henry quickly refused to do so. Phew! She seems to have disliked Catherine Parr and reportedly said of Henry's sixth marriage, Madame Parr is taking on a great burden on herself. I mean, she wasn't wrong. Just don't think too much about what happened to the last Catherine. Yikes. Her former husband then died at the age of 55 when Anne was still only 31. The king is dead. Long live the king. 9-year-old King Edward V. Anne was one of only 2 of Henry's wives to outlive him, the other being the last wife, the 34-year-old Catherine Parr, who died the following year. Anne was the last wife standing. In the rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, she's the second divorced. But let's be honest, she's the real winner here. She had been well taken care of under Henry's reign. When the economy faltered and her funds were diminishing, the king gave her more money. He just gave her a raise. But he was gone now, and his 9-year-old son Edward was now the king. Edward did not feel the same responsibility to Anne as his father had. And in any case, his government was being run by other people because he was still a child. What was obvious was that Anne wasn't going to get any more raises from the crown. She was the stepmother of a king whose father had had 6 wives. This phase in her life only lasted 6 years, though. The son Henry had wanted so badly died at the age of 15, unmarried and childless. The king is dead. Long live the queen? The question was, what queen? Edward did not get along with his older sister Mary. She was very Catholic, and he was very not. And being older than the Protestant Elizabeth, she should have been next, but her brother changed the succession, naming his cousin and fellow Protestant Lady Jane Grey as his heir. A whole big drama happened, and people fought. Mary became the new Queen of England, the first uncontested Queen Regnant of England, because Jane was contested, then killed. Once she was gone, Mary became uncontested. So the king and then kind of the queen died. Long live the queen. On the 4th of August, 1553, Anne wrote to King Henry's daughter, Queen Mary I, to congratulate her on her marriage to Philip of Spain. It was a nice gesture, but not really much to congratulate. But we'll get back to that later also. Anne also took part in Mary I's coronation procession and may have been present at her coronation. This was England's first queen to be accepted in her own right, if you don't count Lady Jane Grey, but again, we'll get back to that. She will have an episode. These were her last public appearances, as the new queen was a strict Catholic and yet again changed religion, now becoming a Roman Catholic, because Anne was willing to be whatever kind of Christian would keep her alive. She loved Jesus and she loved living. After a brief return to prominence, she lost royal favor the next year in 1554, following Wyatt's rebellion. Wyatt's rebellion was more politically based than religion-based, but there was a lot of overlap between politics and religion at this time. Here's the short version. King Henry had 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Mary was very Catholic, like her mother and her grandmother. She wanted everyone to know she was the most Catholic-y Catholic in England. Elizabeth and Edward had been born into the Church of England after Henry's split from the Catholic Church. They were both Protestants. The Church of England looked Catholic and really wasn't a lot different. They just didn't follow the Pope. Catholics were disappointed when Henry's son Edward, a Protestant, became king. But when he died, very young, his elder sister Mary was next in line for the throne, but she was Catholic. So it was a yo-yo of state-required religion. You're Catholic. No, you're Protestant. Nope, you're Catholic. Protestant, Catholic. And if you found yourself on the wrong side, you could be killed. Burned at the stake for picking the wrong side. Burned at the stake for picking the wrong Christian religion. I'm just going to say that Jesus never burned anyone at the stake, and I like to think he was anti-burning people alive. Wyatt's rebellion were supporters of Anne Boleyn's daughter, the Protestant Elizabeth. They had hoped to replace Mary with Elizabeth as queen. The only way to do that was to kill Mary, because she was at least as legally legitimate as her sister was. Mary did not know if her sister was in on it, but she suspected that she may be. I don't think she was. And if she was, the girl was just trying to stay alive in an age when that wasn't easy. Mary also suspected her stepmother Anne of being involved, because she was very close to Elizabeth. But again, aside from being a supportive stepmother to both women, she didn't seem to take sides. Mary was sure the Protestants were out to get her, and she wasn't totally wrong. It wasn't easy being the first female monarch of England. Arguably, though, she could have had less people martyred. Anne's close association with Elizabeth had convinced the Queen that the Lady Anne of Cleves was of the plot and intrigued with the Duke of Cleves to obtain help for Elizabeth, matters in which the King of France was a prime mover. There is no evidence that Anne was invited back to court after 1554. She was compelled to live a quiet and obscure life on her estates. After her arrival as the king's bride, Anne never left England. Despite occasional feelings of homesickness, Anne was generally content in England and was described as a lady of right commendable regards, courteous, gentle, a good housekeeper, and very bountiful to her servants. When Anne's health began to fail, Mary allowed her to live at Old Chelsea Manor, a one-time residence of the Queen's half-sister Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth I. Here, in the middle of July 1557, Anne dictated her last will. In it, she mentions her brother, sister, and sister-in-law, as well as the future Queen Elizabeth, the Duchess of Suffolk, and the Countess of Arundel. She left some money to her servants and asked if Mary and Elizabeth could employ them in their households. She was remembered by everyone who served her as a particularly generous and easygoing mistress. She probably would have made a pretty epic wife, but that was Henry's loss. Anne died at Chelsea Old Manor on the 16th of July, 1557, at the age of 42. The most likely cause of her death was cancer. Anne's epitaph in Westminster Abbey, which is in English, reads simply, Anne of Cleves, Queen of England, born 1515, died 1557. Simple, straightforward, and right to the point. And that is where we'll leave it for this week. What did you think of Anne of Cleves? Honestly, I think she lived her best post-king life, and she only had to be married to that man for 6 months and then moved on. Good for her. She survived against all odds. King Henry executed 2 of his wives, one before Anne and one after Anne. Anne was able to live her best life as a single woman away from her brother and King Henry. She kind of nailed it. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you can support me at buymeacoffee.com/longlivethequeen. Long live to all the queens out there. And until next week, bye.